long-term travel, living abroad, digital nomadry, with or without a family. Episode is going to be a little bit different than what you normally hear on this podcast, but something you might not know about me is that this is actually going to be my 12th winter in a row where I have traveled a minimum of 4 months. So I'm basically a snowbird. I live in Toronto in the summers, and I leave every single winter and I live abroad. I've lived in, I think, 11 different countries now over that time. This coming winter, 2024, I'm in a combination of Nicaragua and Mexico. And I have two young kids. I've got a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so the question of, oh, what do you do about school? How do you work? How do you work out? All that kind of stuff. We decided to do a special call for the students in the online trainer mentorship that would be interested in it, where it's a group call, so there's other people taking place, and then I talk about a lot of my philosophies towards why I do it, but also the specifics down to, like, how do you actually maximize currency conversion and spend the least amount of money because banks rip you off. I mean, that's just one example, but how we decide where to go, how we manage it with kids. We, of course, talk about the big S question, the school question with children, with school-aged children. Calvin's in grade 1, and everything in between. So if you're interested at all, or perhaps you're dreaming, or it's inspirational for you, whatever, this idea of long-term travel and working abroad and exploring the world and adventure, then have a listen to this episode. This is a group call from the Online Trainer Mentorship. I hope that it helps. If nothing else, I hope that it fires a bit of a fire under your butt, man, to get out there and explore a little bit more. This world is cool as shit, and I want more people to get out and check it out. Enjoy. I'll be back afterwards to recommend another episode for you. We're talking today about really long-term travel, working abroad, fitness, and this is a subject, as some of you might know, is very near and dear to me. This will be my 12th winter in a row abroad, so I've lived somewhere other than my home in Toronto for 4 to 6 months every year for the last 12 years. I started doing it as a single guy. Allison started joining me when we had Calvin. She came along. And now, of course, with both of our kids, and actually my mother-in-law comes with me very often as well. Allison's mom comes with us quite a bit too. We do bring a nanny with us sometimes. I could talk about that a little bit. And I want to talk about everything from how we decide where to stay to fitness to, specific money stuff like what it costs, and even just how to maximize things like currency conversions, because it seems small and insignificant, but when you're living somewhere for 3 or 4 months, it could be the difference between 5 or 10% on every single thing that you buy. Is understanding how to get money in ways that is better, so you don't get ripped off by your bank as much. You're going to get ripped off in currency conversion anyway, but a lot of places as well that you go to, if you can pay cash, give you big discounts. If you can negotiate ahead of time, give you big discounts and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that as well, even down to like travel insurance and optimizing and maximizing things like travel insurance. So it's going to be super wide ranging. The first thing that I'll start at is the biggest awareness point that I had, which is that, surprise, surprise, fitness comes first. And I'm not saying that fitness is necessarily the most important thing when you travel or live abroad, or the most important thing in your life. But what I found is that when you schedule fitness first, everything else falls into place. One of my favorite parts about the long-term travel is that it kind of forces this recalibration multiple times throughout the year. Every time you pick up somewhere and leave and reestablish yourself somewhere else, well, it's an opportunity to reprioritize everything that you do and make it better and better and better. It's this idea of, hey, knowing now what I know, what would I change if I could go back? Well, you can actually go back now, and you can change it and reset your schedule and reset your work and the things that you do. And I have done that at least twice a year, where I've completely wiped my schedule clean and set it new at least twice a year for the last 12 years. And every single time, I get a little bit better at figuring out the type of stuff that I want to own, how I want to spend my time, who I want to spend my time with. And I recommend you do that. You look at setting up in a new place as an opportunity to not add, but subtract from your life, and systematically reprioritize and add things back in. as time goes on. And what I think that you'll find is what I found is that unconsciously we kind of just collect shit. We collect responsibilities. We collect physical things. We collect commitments, work commitments, even just commitments in terms of like the content that we create or the stuff that we do to serve our clients or whatever. We very often collect more and more and more of these things, and we never actually give them back. We never actually subtract them. We just keep adding. And it's very useful to have this point where you just say, hey, this is kind of like a spring cleaning. And I have found that's very difficult to do unless I physically pick myself up from one place and set myself down in another place. And perhaps the best way to do that and to begin to rebuild my schedule is actually to schedule fitness first, because that allows me to do two things. Number one is it helps me figure out where I want to live. I found that when I'm working out and on a good workout schedule, I just feel better and I'm a better human. And so when we're figuring out locations, walkability we found is very, very important. I don't want to go to a place where I have to rent a car and get around everywhere. It is kind of fun to pick up like whatever vehicles are available. Like Costa Rica, we drove ATVs for 8 months, right? In Thailand and Southeast Asia, you drive motorbikes. That's kind of fun. But at the same time, I still want to be able to walk to places as much as possible. And so what I'll actually do is, a lot of people talk about like what towns to live in. I actually think you need to go one step deeper and you need to figure out where in the town to live. And so what I do is I try to figure out where I'm going to work, and I try to figure out where I'm going to work out. And I will set one of those things, usually the gym, and I'll actually set that as the address in Airbnb. And I'll look at a radius within about 2 or 3 kilometers of that. And that's what I'll look at for what I want to rent. Because I would rather live in a place that's a little bit less than optimal, but walking distance to the gym and where I'm going to work, than a place that's beautiful and amazing and gorgeous, but like up on the hill where I have to get into a car every single day and drive 15 minutes into town. We found, particularly with family, but we found that makes a big difference. But the other thing with fitness is that, I don't know, you guys let me know if this is true. Throw up your hands or come in and comment if you want. When I schedule a workout, the rest of my schedule kind of falls into place naturally around that. It seems to be the first domino, where whenever I'm reestablishing a schedule, if I know that I'm going to work out at 7 a.m. at this place, or I'm going to work out at 9 a.m. at that place, it's pretty easy to organize the rest of the pieces around it. You know, when Allison's going to be on with the kids, when I'm going to be on with the kids, when I'm going to do work, what my work schedule is going to be like, when we're going to have time for one another. When we don't figure out that fitness part, everything seems kind of jumbled. Has anybody else figured out that? Or is that just me? Like, that's a big, big thing. So I'll give you an example of this. 3 years ago, I think, Kelvin turned 2 on this trip. So 4 years ago, we decided that we wanted to do an 8-month trip. And it was going to start in Mexico for the winter, and then we were going to kick off to Europe. And so we did. So, and it all centered around Allison saying that her dream was always to live in Greece for a few months. Her dream was to live on an island in Greece for a few months. And the way that Europe works, for anybody who hasn't looked into this, is basically there's the Schengen, there's what's called the Schengen zone, and you can only be in the Schengen zone for a certain amount of time. I think it's 90 days, and then you have to be outside of the Schengen zone for 180 days. So you have to be pretty careful with travel in Europe if you want to get good weather and if you want to be there for an extended period of time. And one of the best ways to do this is kind of to look at it in terms of shorter seasons, and also look at the types of places in Europe that are warm in the shoulder seasons. So like southern France, southern Greece, southern Spain are warmer in the falls and the springs, whereas a lot of places in Europe can be quite cold in those times. And so we decided on the south of Greece, on Crete, because it was the southernmost point of Greece. And we were going to be there during the fall, because if we were going to be in Europe during that time, uh, basically it had to be in a shoulder seat because we wanted to be there for so long. So, okay, we're going to Crete. Well, Crete, if anybody who's been there knows, it's very, very long, and there's like 6 or 7 towns, and where do you stay in the towns, whatever. Or you can stay out in the middle of nowhere as well. So I actually did a search for co-working spaces in Crete. And the only co-working space at that time was in a little town called Amoudara, Amoudara, I think it is. It's like 45 minutes from Heraklion, which is the capital of Crete, which is where you fly into and stuff. Okay, so we put the co-working space into Airbnb. We found a place on the water pretty close to there. The first day that we got there, the first thing that we did when we arrived was we walked around town and looked for gyms. And there are no gyms in Amoudara. It's very, very small. But we were walking around town and we're asking people, and all of a sudden I walked by a little hotel, very, very small little hotel. And in the front of it, I see a bunch of fitness equipment. There's nobody around. We're in like a shoulder season, right? There's nobody around. And Amoudara is like kind of like a Greek beach town. It's like not really like a tourist place. So I walk around back in the hotel and I try to find somebody to talk to figure out like what this little thing is, because I figure I'll just walk out there. And there's this guy with hunting gear that's there. And he's just like this huge like Greek guy, and Greek men generally are just like very in your face. And I ask him and I say, hey, you know, the gym in the front. He goes, oh, that's my brother. Yeah, it's my brother. He's a personal trainer. Let me call him. So he calls his brother. His brother comes in the front. And his brother was a personal trainer, was a Greek endurance athlete and personal trainer. And so for the 2 months that we lived there, 2.5 months that we lived there, I hired him as my personal trainer for, I think it was 20 euros an hour. And he trained me in this little gym. And that's just an example of, you kind of need to search for it sometimes, but it's a wonderful way to experience something new physically. But what we also found was, hey, whenever he was available to train me was kind of how we set the rest of our schedule. Jackie, you asked a couple questions. What did you say? Just so I can add them. Oh, with Calvin. Yeah, we'll get into school and stuff for sure. 100%. I think location is a really important thing to consider. How do you decide where to go? It's this catch-22 problem, isn't it? It's like, if you could be anywhere in the world at any time, which a lot of you can, how do you ever decide where to be and when? And the answer is, first off, I think that there's not really that good of an answer a lot of the time. Most of the places that I decided to go was one person one time said that this place was pretty neat. Like one guy said to me one time, hey man, you know, you seem like the kind of guy who likes to open up his glass sliding door and put his feet out on his balcony and look out on the beach and sip coffee and do work. You know, Uruguay is a great place for that. You should go to Uruguay. I was like, all right, cool. I didn't even look at it. I booked a trip to Montevideo and we were there for 4 months. Like, how bad could it be? But at the same time, I have found that, number one, walkability is very, very important. I've also found it's very, very important to me, at least, and this is something that you'll probably check in with yourself. Place that has a lot of local flavor, place that has a lot of energy, and it's not a purely expat type place. We spent 2 winters in Nosara in Costa Rica, which is a really well-known kind of expat-y place. And it was beautiful and exotic, nice. The weather was good. But there was no culture. It's basically just Americans living in a sunny place. The Costa Ricans come in and they serve the Americans and then they leave. Whereas Mexico, where we go to, it's actually, it's a town called Sayulita. It's actually a Mexican tourism spot. And as a result, it is vibrant, colorful, energetic, musical. If you sit at a table in a restaurant, you might be the only non-Mexican there. There's something about that that I really, really love. And it's still got all the comforts that, you know, you and I would have. But there's something about that that I personally have figured out that I really, really enjoy is something that is not just like a bunch of Americans in a warm place. Casey, you've been to Silita, you said?
Sorry, I have my video off. I mean, yeah, I've been twice. It's great. It's like you get a little golf cart and you can just zip around the whole town. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, super fun. So we've lived there for, I mean, this will be our 5th winter there. It's rad, man. So I'll talk to you about actually renting a golf cart, because that comes down into the money part that I'm going to talk below, about how we get our golf cart for half price of anybody else when we're there, which has saved us, I mean, probably saved us about $8,000 of money. So it could be pretty significant. But deciding where you stay and deciding how long to stay there actually makes a big impact, if not arguably a bigger impact than anything else. And it's something that people kind of gloss over. It's something that a lot of people go to very, very common spaces. I think it's important to check in and say, what kind of experience do I want? A lot of people, when they go to Mexico, they'll go to the other side of Mexico, what's called Tulum. Like they'll go to like Playa del Carmen, Tulum, and that's just a different vibe. And that's just not the right vibe for me. It's very much an American, like kind of Instagrammy tourist vibe, right? Which is totally cool if you want that type of thing. But it's not for me. And so check in with yourself. What kind of experience do you want? And when you figure that out, you can start Googling around and start asking people based off of that, and then narrow down, and then that'll help you narrow down the towns. So if you have an idea of the country based off of the location, based off of the temperature, whatever time of the year, you can narrow down into the different towns based off of what kind of vibe, what kind of culture you want. And then I like to narrow it down even farther to things like walkability, proximity to good cafes to work in, or co-work spaces if they exist, and gyms at the same time. Bob, what's up?
I just wanted to add something. As you know, we've been traveling since about 9 years now, full time. And you're absolutely right. You know, if you need a gym, this is all cool. You know, I really understand that. But if you have older kids, so we started traveling as our daughter was 2, and that was easy going. But now it's so important for her and for us to have kids at the same age around.
Yeah.
And I mean, close by. And usually I don't talk about local kids because the language barrier is very high. English, Ella speaks English, so that's okay. But here in Portugal, for example, no way, you know? So that's why we created that we share with groups like Telegram groups, something with traveling families and all that, to create that, you know? And
what are some of the names of those if people want to search them? Because I know that you've been a part of them. I've never done any of them.
Like the groups?
Yeah.
German speaking, no need for you guys. You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're always like expat groups or something, you know?
Yeah, I know that there are organizations of traveling expat families. I don't know any of the names offhand, but there are organizations that you can link up with, and they will like basically caravan to different places at different points of time. So if that's something you're interested in, it's worth Googling. How we tackle that, Bob, is, I mean, my oldest Calvin is 6 now. But how we tackle that is we actually try to find a rental. We don't like renting a house because we find it's very isolating. What we actually prefer to do is we prefer to rent a condo in a complex that has anywhere from like 20 to 50 units. So not too big, but big enough that there's a lot of people there. And there's also a fair amount of people coming and going, that has a big pool in the middle, because the pool is like a congregational point. And what we found is that that's kind of built-in community. There's often some people who live there all the time, who have families, who have kids. But what it does mean is that there's almost always families that are going to be coming and going. And the first thing that anybody does when they get to a new place like that is they jump in the pool. And especially if you've been there for a long time, you're like, yeah, we're going in there. Yeah, it's our favorite spot. Now, you wouldn't never read about it. Like it's our secret spot. Like, let's go together, right? And then you just invite them along with you, and then your kids are friends and your friends for the time that they're there. And everybody knows what the relationship is. It's usually a week or two relationship at a time. But we found that makes a big difference with young kids as well, for sure.
Absolutely. I see that. Absolutely. But now Ella, she has got friends, and so we want to meet up with them. And now we like rent a house and we may share a room, or we have a big house with like 3 flats in, so that makes things a lot easier because if kids are happy, you are happy, right? So everybody knows that.
Yeah, that's super cool that you've been able to do that. We've never been able to build that over the years, but that you're able to build that with a bunch of different families that you can meet up with. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yeah, man. Thank you for sharing that too. I remember back in Thailand when we met up, probably 8 years ago, on Koh Phangan when we first met, Bob. I remember that you had a group of people, of families that you were kind of hanging out with there as well. That was before we had kids, but you had Ella at that time.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just but this is a small link, a quick link to generate clients as well, because I always give like a free mobility class once a week when we are somewhere. And this is just pure gold to, spread the word. You ever heard of Bob? He's doing blah, blah, blah. And this is just a great thing. Sorry for interrupting you.
Perfect. Very cool. Any more questions on how to figure out where to go? If not, I'll move on. I can move on to maybe money stuff. Okay, cool. So let's move on to money stuff. The number one thing is exchange rates. You will get royally ripped off by your bank every single time you try to exchange money into a foreign currency. And there's no way to avoid that, but there's ways to kind of mitigate that. So the first thing that we do is, if I know that I'm going to be somewhere for a long period of time. Oh, the final part actually of the location stuff is, real quick, I'll tell you a story because I think that this actually matters a fair bit too. A good friend of mine had his honeymoon and they were going to Thailand and they were going there for 3 weeks. And he said it was miserable. And the reason that it was miserable was that they wanted to do too much. They went to too many places. They moved around too much. They were constantly on boats and planes and stuff. I think it's way better to choose one place and stay there for a longer period of time and not feel like you need to see it all. It's way better to settle in, get into the fabric of a place, get into a bit of a flow in a place, than feel like you need to move around all of the time. You're never going to see everything anyway. And kind of remove yourself from that feeling, I guess. Okay. That's the final one on that topic. Money stuff. If you know that you're going to go to a country for any period of time, what I actually do is I track the exchange rate against my own, and I look at the historical exchange rate for the last year or two, and then I'll track the exchange rate for a couple months. So I have a pretty good idea of when it is optimal in my favor. And so if I know that the Mexican peso is going to be in and around from 15 to 18 pesos to a Canadian dollar at any given time, what I'll do is I'll actually just track the exchange. And whenever it's favorable, I'll go to my bank and I'll buy a lot of pesos to bring with me. And so instead of exchanging them in ATM, which is a big problem when you're away, you'll get charged a ton of money from that. And instead of using your credit card, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is, again, going to cost you a fortune, that alone will save me, $500 to $1,000 every single year of just every couple of days. I'll just flick on, it's Xe.com. I'll flick on the currency exchange. I'll be like, oh yeah, no, it looks pretty good right now. And I'll go to the bank that day or the next day and I'll take out however amount of money that I think that I'll need, whatever, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in Mexican pesos, and we'll just keep it in our safe at home. And then when we travel to Mexico, this is always a question because we often travel with a lot of cash because we pay a lot of cash, we pay for a lot of things in cash in full in advance. It's another way that we save a lot of money, but we often travel there with a lot of cash. And going through airports and stuff, it can be like a lot kind of sketchy to bring like $10,000 in your bag. And so we'll stuff it underneath the soles of our shoes. So I will literally take out the sole of my shoe. I'll put like The last time Allison and I went to Mexico, we both had $3,000 under each sole of our shoe. So we had $9,000 under the soles of our shoes. So I'll put them in plastic baggies. I'll put them under my sole. I'll put the sole back in the shoe, and then we'll literally walk on it the entire time. And that way, you know, when we get there, we're not worried about anybody going through our bags. We're not worried about being ripped off, whatever. So we'll travel with a fair bit. And we'll get it in advance. If I know that there's going to be big expenses, could be rent. Could also be, now rent the first time that you go to a place, it's nice to be able to trust Airbnb, but one of the benefits of going back places is we know people and we actually just negotiate outside of Airbnb and we'll pay in full in cash. And like, we'll get places. A lot of places outside of Canada and the US actually have really high fees for things like using credit cards and really high taxes for things like Airbnb and that. And so one of the things that we will do is, I mean, we're talking like they pay 10% plus. So we'll negotiate 5-7% less and we'll pay them in cash and everybody's happy. For example, our golf carts. Casey mentioned golf carts in Sailita. So golf carts are how you get around. I know that we're going to rent a golf cart for the whole time we're there. If you go to Sailita and you rent a golf cart, it's $55 a day. $55 a day for 3 months, for 4 months is a lot of money, right? We've gotten our golf cart for $25 a day every time that we're there. And the reason is, the first time that we were going to be there for a number of months, I looked up all the different golf cart rental companies and I sent the same email to every single one of them. And I said, hey, my name's John. We'll come to Sailita. We're going to be here this date to this date. It's this many total days. I'm sending all of the other companies this exact same message. I don't want to negotiate back and forth. What is the absolute best rate that you can give me? I'll pay you upfront in American cash tomorrow. And this was like 4 months in advance. And I was able to send them PayPal, you know, American dollars cash, right? And so they all got back with their best rate. And one person got back that was way better. It was $25. And every year I just send them cash in front months in advance, like 3-4 months before we arrive. And it's less than half the price than we would otherwise pay. And he's happier than a pig in shit, because this guy is now still getting a couple $1,000s for a golf cart rental 4 months before the season. He probably goes and buys another golf cart to rent out for that season with the money that I send him way in advance. And then he gives me the whatever. He probably gives me like his crappiest golf cart that he's not going to rent out to anybody anyway. So tracking exchange, trying to negotiate with established companies up front. And one of the things that Bob said is, yeah, very trusty. I have a life mantra philosophy that I abide by, which is to always default to trust. And it is just the way that I've decided that I want to live my life. I have found that the vast majority of people that I meet are trustworthy, are not going to rip you off. And in the odd case where somebody is, and it's happened to me, we had computers stolen in Costa Rica. We've had stuff happen to us, of course. But the odd times where something has happened has in no way, shape, or form outweighed all of the times when I've benefited by defaulting to trust in this way. And it's led to much less stressful way to live, but it's also actually made me a ton of money with stuff like these golf cart rentals, or the same thing with Airbnb, right? Like, yeah, we got ripped off on a rental because we did this type of thing one time, but we've done this a dozen times, call it. And, you know, basically every other time it's worked out fine. So I'm not saying be stupid. The first time that we go to a new place we're unfamiliar, we usually do book through a booking site. But you're right, Bob, it is trusty. But I found that defaulting to trust is just a better way in every way, shape, or form to live. I think most people are inherently good. trying to do a good job for reasons that are noble. There's been really fascinating interviews and New York Times articles and stuff like that written by, you know, the Nigerian princes, all of the Nigerian scammers and those types of things with those emails. And they'll talk to these people and they'll say, you know, do you ever feel bad? You're like ripping off, you know, little old ladies and they stuff. And they say, yeah, of course we feel bad. But if the choice is to feed your family, then what choice would you make? This is the only option that we have. So in their mind, they're still doing the right thing for the right reason. Now, objectively, it might not be a good way to operate, but I actually believe that in everybody's own mind, the reasons why they're doing things are noble. And maybe that's not true, and maybe that's too optimistic of a view of the world, but I found that it has very much served me well. The final piece of this is pay with cash as much as possible. Credit cards rip you off, man. Holy shit. Currency conversions, credit cards rip you off like mad. And so you can use them when you're abroad, but a lot of people, if you're going for a trip short term, who cares, right? You're going to pay an extra couple % on every transaction, not the end of the world. But if you're going to somewhere for 4 or 5 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and you're using your credit card every time you do a transaction, it's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. It's going to cost you extra over cash, which you can either bring, or I know in the United States, we don't have options of it in Canada, but in the United States, you can get a whole bunch of different bank accounts that allow you free ATM, international ATM transactions. It might be worth getting a bank account with something like that, because an ATM, for example, an ATM in Mexico is going to charge you 189 pesos, which is about 13, 14 Canadian dollars. And the most that you can often take out is 5,000 pesos, which is about $200 in one time. And it's going to give you a bad conversion rate. So to take out $200, it's going to cost you about, call it $240 or so. And you have no option other than to take that cash out. Traveling with a bunch of US dollars, paying in cash as much as possible, or figuring out a way, you know, like even just calling your bank, particularly if you live in the States. In Canada, we have fewer options because our banks are monopolies and suck. But if you live in the States, call around a bunch of different banks and say, hey, I'm going to be traveling internationally. You know, I'm going to need to get cash out at ATMs. Like, what can you do? A lot of them will give you preferential exchange rates or eliminate any fees from ATMs. And that could be hundreds of dollars. Over the course of your trip, it might be worth setting up an account with one of these banks and transferring money into it just for this trip. It really does make a difference. There were a couple questions that popped in, I think. Let's see. Rough amount of lead time is what's the question here? Zoe, what's your question? Sorry. I don't quite understand.
Sure. FX is exchange rates. So I was just wondering, when you were talking about earlier, like before the credit card bank account, you were saying it's a good idea to check online, see what the exchange rate is. If it's favorable, you go to the bank the next day versus getting cash on site or through an ATM. So I was just wondering how much does that work? And you kind of answered it later. You said 3 to 4 months in advance you can save with the golf cart. I guess at what point does that strategy not make sense from like a lead time perspective of?
I mean, it depends, right? Like, we're going to Nicaragua this year for a couple months, and I looked up the last year fluctuation in Nicaraguan, I think it's Nicaraguan Cordoba to Canadian dollars, and it basically hasn't moved. It's basically a straight line. So I don't even look at it then, whereas the Mexican peso actually goes up and down a fair bit. So I think it depends. My suggestion is look at the last year, look at the last 2 years, and you can search that very easily on xe.com. Look at how much fluctuation there's been between the currencies. And then you can get a pretty good idea of what kind of ranges that it seems to sit in. Like the American to Canadian dollar, for example. It's like basically it's been 133 to 138 over the last year. You know, like $1.33 Canadian to $1.38 Canadian to an American dollar. Oh, sorry, vice versa, over the last year. So then you can just like look at that and say, okay, well, I know if it's 136 right now, I'm fine. I usually try to watch it 4 or 5 months in advance, but I can't say that I always do. And you may not have that much lead time for your trip either. So
Sure. Right now I have no trip, so I have plenty of lead time, but thank you. It makes sense.
yeah, I mean, look at the past year or so. You'll get a pretty good idea of what it fluctuates in. What gyms in Sayulita, Alex, do you recommend? There's two. Sayulita has Sayulita Fit, which is more of a conventional gym. It's run by my buddy Josh. It is fantastic. It's a good gym, clean equipment. Great if you want to go there by yourself. It's got a good range of machines, of dumbbells, of barbells. It's a great spot. And then there's Quilombo, which is where I went last year and where I'll go this year again. It's run by somebody named Christian, one of the sweetest guys you're ever going to meet. And Quilombo is more of a sort of CrossFit functional fitness type studio. They do boxing, they do jiu-jitsu as well. Pretty serious, actually. And their functional classes are just fun. Like it's just like outdoor jungle. You're like running up and down the road. It's that type of thing. So it kind of depends what you're into. But your two options really are Quilombo and Sayulita Fit. And they're both run by incredible people and good spots.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Okay. Location, money stuff. Oh, this kind of goes into money stuff too. Travel insurance. My dad taught me a long time ago, or shared with me his philosophy towards insurance in general, which is to look at insurance as disaster protection. And that's how I look at insurance. So I never buy like the Apple Care plans. I never buy insurance on any devices. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen is this thing breaks and I'm out a couple $1,000. Like, it's not a disaster. And so I look at it the same way with travel medical and stuff, where I always opt for the highest deductible possible. Because to me, if I have to pay $500 because we got to take my kid to an emergency doctor one night because he has an ear infection, like what happened, it's not the end of the world. But I don't want to be out $1 million, let's say, if something tragic happens. And the difference that we found with travel medical is it actually a pretty significant difference in premiums if you go for a high deductible. We do the same thing with cars. We do the same thing with everything. Like, we don't have collision damage waivers on our cars because what's the worst case scenario is the car gets busted and you buy a new car. But we have a high deductible for liability because that brings our premiums down. And the one time that we're going to have to pay that deductible it might suck in the moment and it's happened, but it doesn't outpay all of the premiums that we've saved by having a big deductible. So that's been our philosophy on travel insurance. Where are we staying in Nicaragua, Rhonda? San Juan del Sur is where we're staying this year. We've never been there before. Okay, kids. This has been the biggest question that's come up. Let me see, I'm going to change my view here. Who here has kids and they have either traveled or want to travel and would bring their kids with them?
I have kids.
Yeah, it's quite a few. Okay. What are some of the worries? Hop on. Jackie, what's your worry?
Not really so much worry, just like my 4-year-old's going to be 5 and starting school and stuff. So traveling with school and all that kind of stuff. And also like airplanes and kids. I've never traveled with my kids. I can imagine it won't be a good mix.
Yeah. So airplanes and kids is an easier one. You're not going to die. It's going to suck, but you're not going to die. This goes into I mean, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I could bring it up really quick. We do actually, for that long trip that we did, one of the ways that I decided what countries to go to like whittle down the decision was actually I opened up a map on Google Flights, and you can figure out based off of where you are, you can look at where there's direct flights. And so we actually partly decided where we were going by where there were direct flights and we wouldn't have to do stopovers. And it just, I don't know, there's certain things that I've just found that just makes the experience miserable, and one of them is stopovers. I'd rather be on a plane for 8 hours straight than be on 2 planes for 4 hours at a time. Because the up and down, once you get into it, we just do basically unlimited TV and iPad on the planes, and the kids happy. Another thing that Allison does is she actually goes to the dollar store and buys a whole bunch of different little toys and games and drawing stuff, and she'll take them out one at a time. And we found that works well for restaurants too, actually. It's just to take them out one at a time. So whenever they're acting up, just be like, look, I got something new. Which works well. Kids with school. So Calvin's 6. We didn't know what we were going to do with school. We always said that we'd figure it out when the time came. And we still always say we'll take it a year at a time. We're going away this year. We're taking him out of school. We're unenrolling him for 4 months. We did the same thing last year. We unenrolled him. So you unenroll him, and then we bring him back in, this year we'll bring him back in May, and you will re-enroll him for the last 2 months of school. It's kind of one of those in the school system, like, ask for forgiveness, not permission type thing. I don't think that they're ecstatic about it, but at the same time, there's not much that the school can really do. It's a public school. We have found, and I think that this is unique to every kid, but Calvin hasn't missed a beat, man. And we don't do a lot of homeschooling. I mean, we do some, but like you, I'm sure, we've always read to him. We always try to instill lessons as we go about the day. We do little math problems as we're like, counting change or whatever it is. And then what he's been able to experience, I mean, he watches kids sell things and get rejected constantly in Mexico. Calvin's not scared of rejection. That's a pretty amazing thing to arm your child with. So I think about all the things that he's able to learn in addition, and I think about all the things that we're teaching him. That having been said, his nanny in Mexico was an American, actually, but we found her in Mexico, and I could talk about how we found her and how we kind of integrate into some of the communities and stuff. But we'd be able to find good programs wherever we go. So we enrolled Calvin into a Spanish, basically jungle school. It's like a local school, but enrolled him into it in Mexico when he was there, and it was all in Spanish. He figured it out. He was happy with it. We'll have little workbooks, books with us, kind of as we go. And you know what? It's been great. Like, it's been great. He hasn't missed a beat at all with the school. But we take it year by year, and I think about it as, what's the worst that can happen? You go back home. I mean, probably won't happen, but it's not that you don't have that option. And we ask him, and he's now old enough that we involve him in the decision to figure it out. But one of the things that you can do, and so before we decide where we go, this is one of the fun things about the internet. Before we actually go somewhere, what I'll do is also usually about a month before we leave, if I've never been to the place before, sometimes more often, like I've already joined these groups for Nicaragua, is I'll search on Facebook for expat groups for whatever town we're going to. And so like expats or digital nomads living in San Juan del Sur, or expat Sayulita, or whatever. And there's always a few groups. And number one, it's a great way to get to know services in the group. Transportation services, pickup services from the airports and stuff. But also, it's a great way to get the lay of the land. And I just watch the conversations often. I don't even participate. But it's how we found our nanny too. So I put a note into the group. I Googled and whatnot, like nanny services and sci leader. But I put a note into the group and into a couple of the different sci leader groups, and I just said, hey, this is who we are. We're going to be here from this time. We're looking for a nanny, ideally somebody with a little bit of education experience. These are our kids. Does anybody know anybody? All right. And often in a lot of these types of towns, you find that you get somebody who, loves to surf or is kind of giving themselves a second life or whatever, who's looking for a way to make a couple extra bucks. And that's worked out really, really well for us. So you can always find stuff. It's like, I don't know, you're resourceful. Same, we've discovered that we're much more resourceful than we thought that we were. It's hard because I don't want to say that, like I don't think that there's anything wrong with the school system where we are, but I also think there's a lot of stuff missing from it. And when it comes with kids, there's always this existential worry of like, am I ruining them for the rest of your life? And I just don't think that that's the case. I think the more things that they can witness and explore and experience, the better. And like I said, worst case scenario, if it doesn't work or if people aren't happy or if whatever, then you don't go the next year or you go home. But, everybody else is going to tell you. And that's the number one question I get is like, you have kids, how do you do? And I'm like, oh, we just leave. Like, it's been fine. But as the kids get older, that might change. And if your kids are teens and very active in the winter sports, like Rhonda, I don't know. I think winter sports are nuts. I always love people who go on skiing vacations. It's just like, why would you go from where it's cold to where it's colder for your vacation? But Rhonda, talk to me about where that message came from. I mean, obviously your kids are involved in winter sports, but are you wanting to go away and you feel like you can't? Like, where does this come from?
Yeah, so we're kind of in a tough spot. So my son, he's not keen to do something like this. He's like, nah. My daughter, who
How
also
old
is
is he?
very, he's 13.
Okay.
He's like, I don't want to learn how to surf. I want to play hockey. That's the end of it.
Right.
But my daughter, who she's also very active in a winter sport, she's game. She's like, let's get the heck out of here tomorrow. But so I don't know. As I was listening to this, I'm just thinking maybe we could even just take, which might be crazy, take some time in the summer and go. And so it's not taking away from their experience, and then they have a little bit more knowledge to know what they're cool to do or not.
God, the amount of incredible European towns you could go to in the summer. Go to Slovenia. Slovenia is the best because it's basically in the middle of all of the rail lines in Europe. And you can take like a 4 or 5 or 6 hour train ride to Venice, to Munich, to Vienna, to all of, and so Slovenia itself is gorgeous, but you can just get anywhere from it. And I mean, it's cold in the winter, but yeah, do something like that.
Yeah.
Or you could sell your son on Nicaragua because they've got a ball hockey league.
Well, Nicaragua is where we are actually wanting to go. Okay. We have friends there actually, so it was kind of we hear all about their experience. So, but yeah, they actually left. Their son was a very, very talented hockey player, and now he surfs. That's what he does now. So
yeah. I mean, I played hockey my whole life. Canadian, obviously. I played hockey my whole life. I played hockey all through university. I played hockey for 5 or 6 years after university. Reasonably competitive. I mean, I was never going to be in the NHL, but like reasonably competitive. I ran a hockey program for 2 summers. There's actually an award named after me, for an MVP award in a ball hockey league named after me. That's my claim to fame. It's like, I was decent, but I'll tell you, man, I don't miss it. I put on skates for the first time in almost 10 years last year. I don't miss it. And but your son's entire social life is probably surrounded by it as well, which can be tough. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's
see if they'll try it out with you. Be like, what if we
Yeah.
just go and like live in a town for 3 weeks and just see how it is? And they might or they might not. But
yeah.
if
So
he's
my son
13,
literally, he moved away. He doesn't even live with us right now. He moved away for a hockey
Oh.
program.
okay.
So this was a big year for him to kind of see how serious he was about it. So that's the other part of it, is like he has goals for himself.
Right. Would you be able to go away for an extended period of time while he's in this program?
Technically, yes. Yeah.
Would you feel comfortable though? Not really.
I probably not. No.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's different. I mean,
He
the
lives
other
with
piece is like he's going to be gone in 4 or 5 years anyway, out of the house. So there's also
Yeah.
that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's things to think about. So good questions.
The kids thing to me is always an interesting question because I don't know, maybe Bob, you can chime in. It seems to me like it's the kind of thing that everybody really feels like is going to be like the biggest deal ever, and then when they do it, they realize that it's not. It seems to be we've really been convinced that the conventional school system where you're in school every single day this way, this exact way, is the only way to operate. And I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I'm not like, oh, school's awful. But I'm like, there's a lot of other ways to learn too. And I think that at the end of the day, the responsibility to educate a child really comes down to the parents. And I think that school is a big part of that. But I don't think it's the reason to perhaps give away all other experiences that could help the kid grow. But it's definitely the number one worry that I get from people. You know, before we had kids, what's going to happen when you have kids? Then we had Calvin, what's going to happen when he grows up? Now that he's grown up a little bit, what's going to happen when he's in grade school? Now that he's in grade 1, what's going to happen next year? It's just like every year we're like, we'll do it year by year. Hey, it's John again, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that one. That was different for me. I feel like at times I had really good nuggets to kind of add. I felt like at other times there just aren't good answers to some of these questions, which I'm sure you felt as well. You know, a big part of it for me is kind of this overall philosophy of shoot first, ask questions later. You're gonna figure it out. If you put yourself out there, if you just leave, if that's something you want to do, you're going to figure it out once you get there. And a lot of the things that we worry about, oh, is that country safe? Oh, are those people nice? Oh, what are people at home going to think about me? What's going to go on in school? You figure out pretty quickly once you actually do the thing that none of those are really those big deals. A lot of the countries that we go to, other people sometimes say, oh my God, is it safe there? You're like, yeah, it's the nicest people in the world, man. We've never felt in danger. If you do stupid stuff, if you're out at 2 a.m. walking home drunk, yeah, you might get in trouble. But that's the same as Toronto. That's the same as any major city, right? That was a conversation that we had in the Online Trainer Mentorship. And so while the Online Trainer Mentorship is something where we predominantly help you scale your business, we try to go a lot deeper as well. We try to bring people together that are of kind of a common approach, common mindset, common life philosophy with life goals. And we help not just with me saying what I do, but almost like a wisdom experience share. So if the Online Trainer Mentorship is something you think that you might be interested in, we open it up to trainers, nutrition coaches, gym owners, influencers who are already doing at least $1,000 a month online. You can go to my Instagram. I'm at It's Coach Goodman. Send me a DM that's just mentor, and we'll have a conversation to see if it's right for you. There's another call that we kind of did like this, and I want to recommend it to you if you're interested. It's episode 123. I think the title on the podcast is The 4 Big Buckets of Wealth Management, but this is another group call that I did for the Online Trainer Mentorship where I go very deep into wealth management. I tell them about my entire corporate structure. I tell them all about my investments, my investing philosophy, and really how I make most of my money. Because the reality of it is, you make more money with money than you make any other way. And not very many people seem to put a lot of thought these days into how to make money with their money or what their life philosophy is around it. So I just wanted to share really what I do here. And a lot of people messaged me, said that it was really insightful for them. So that's episode 123, the 4 big buckets of wealth management. Hope that you enjoyed listening to that. Thanks for listening to this episode as well. We'll talk again soon.